The story of a family that were just kind of coming back into their neighborhood to get to their house, and a ICE officer fired a tear gas canister under their car. And so it wasn't like they were being anywhere they weren't supposed to be. They were in their neighborhood. And that baby basically almost died. That baby stopped breathing, and they had to get to emergency services because of, that what happened to that baby's lungs because of that tear gas. Things that I know have happened. A number of people have been arrested and taken to Whipple, which is the headquarters of ICE right now. There's the courts that are at ICE, but there's also a detention center in the basement of the building. It's somewhat makeshift. I don't think that they planned long-term for this to be some kind of prison, but there have been people, observers, who were taken there, arrested, taken there, and what they saw and what they heard was absolutely horrific.
So, Adam, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what's been happening there?
Yeah. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Adam Levy. I'm a singer-songwriter, been in a variety of bands and musical projects out of the Twin Cities for years, and toured and released lots of records. I'm also an educator, so I've taught high school, U.S. world history and government and economics. I am an activist. I lost a child to suicide in 2012, so been really active in mental health issues, suicide and addiction. I'm an activist in the Twin Cities, and many consider me a public historian just because I'm really interested in the history of movements of liberation, fascism, genocide, those kinds of things. And so when I start conversations in social media, I tend to lead with that foot. And right
Sure.
now, we are in the midst of what I would call a siege. It's an invasion of federal officers who are behaving in an extremely lawless fashion. It's like a private paramilitary group of brown shirts who have, very little training, very little intelligence. The screening process is minimal, and these guys every day are ramping up their level of terror and violence against the community. Meanwhile, for the last month and a half, people have been developing a really sophisticated network of communication, which involves mutual aid, helping families that are stuck at their house because people don't want to leave their house to go to get groceries. Children are not going to school. Let's be really clear, like the arrests that are happening by and large are not people who are the worst of the worst. These are people who, for the most part, have been here for years, working legally, paying taxes, just going through the process of trying to become naturalized citizens. They still get arrested. There are people being stopped and picked up on these Kavanaugh stops just based on racial profiling. A lot of the people who are doing the work are people of color. And so when you're having conversations with people on the right about what's going on, they often say, well, it's, I've seen Latino officers and Asian officers and people of color. Well, these jobs pay really well. They are, though, kind of a Ponzi scheme. Like, you get a $10,000 check when you do this 47-day training, and you're going to be getting this $50,000 over a period of time, but you are committed to this, to this job. And if you leave, you have to pay all that money back.
Oh, wow. They're really trying to lock people in.
They are trying to lock people in. And
what's
so
the salary for
color? It's a big employer.
Do you know what the annual salary is?
I don't know what the annual salary is. I've applied for about 8 jobs, and I would say the ones I applied for were probably, like, for investigators, $65,000 a year. I'm not sure what the younger officers are making. I was applying for, older positions, but they're hiring people. There's no age limit. They're hiring dudes that are 70 years old to do this work. But I just wanted to be clear about the fact that they are hiring all of these folks of color to do this heavy lifting, and is very analogous historically to the way in which people of color are used in kind of racist situations, whether it was the slave catchers or the people who were administering torture. It's almost a sort of justification for, hey, we're not racist. We've got these people that are doing this work, but the work is awful. Or capos in concentration camps who were Jews who were doing this horrible stuff to each other, but also getting some sort of privileges by being capos.
What's been your personal experience, like your direct experience of the situation up till now?
So my personal experience has been basically going on these patrols every day, what we call commuting, where you try to find vehicles that are probably ICE vehicles. There's like 3,000 in our community, swarming the community, 3,000 officers and thousands of vehicles. And so it's pretty easy to go down the street and spot one of these rental vehicles that's an ICE vehicle that people have been keeping track of. So I'll go out and follow these vehicles, chase them around. I've been stopped. I've been surrounded. My car's been surrounded by officers with weapons. I've been threatened with arrest. And I've just continued my commute to do the work, which is really like the intent of us is to sort of slow these guys down. They are doing abductions every day, but the fact that there's all of these eyes on the ground, that there are people who swarm whenever there's an abduction taking place, there are all kinds of notification systems so that people will show up in these sort of flash mobs with really loud whistles, people screaming at these officers, people basically, trying to tell these officers the work they're doing is awful. They're disappearing people. They are, you know, it's like a Gestapo.
Yeah.
So
Um,
that's one of the things I do. I've also got a few groups that we meet on a regular basis to kind of talk about strategy and tactics and uh, what we're experiencing. I'm also involved in the direct action meetings with the Twin Cities Direct Action Movement, which is made up of people in the unions and some of the more active direct action groups in the Twin Cities. So trying to figure out what kinds of things we can do to slow down or shut down ICE in our cities.
I mean, Minneapolis doesn't even have like the biggest minority population, or as far as I understand. I mean, it's not like
No,
New York or something. You know.
no, I mean, it really doesn't have anything to do, as you mentioned earlier, with fraud. That was a pretext for coming here. And they are using this as a distraction. It's a punishment. As we know, the president is all about vengeance and revenge, and he was humiliated by Walz during the election. And I think it's very personal the way he's sort of sicked all of the social media influencers on the state and on Walz in particular. Walz ended up basically resigning because of this, insane, these allegations that somehow he's responsible for some of this fraud. We've been investigating the fraud in the state for a few years. It's not like it's something we don't know about, but it's not anything compared to the huge amount of corruption and graft that's happening in this administration. So clearly, this is like creating distractions, punishing blue states, punishing this governor that he's got a bone to pick with, and basically trying to humiliate a blue state in general and liberal people.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why Minneapolis is the first target, including the Black Lives Matter, the George
Yeah,
Floyd thing, the
I
fact that
think the
it's like
George Floyd issue, it was huge in terms of dialogue in this country, and it's not a coincidence that George Floyd happened in the Twin Cities, just with the amount of social activism and that sort of percentage of people who are active to population. It's huge. But the George Floyd movement, I would argue, had a large part of the far right reaction that got Trump reelected. This fear about race and racial identity and the fear of racial reckoning and all of this sort of stuff that they kind of call woke. It's just, this is payback. They are trying to pay us back.
tell me about people who or firsthand or secondhand who've been detained or taken to a camp somewhere, and I mean, I know some people are just like disappearing without a trace, basically. I heard
Yeah.
yesterday about they grabbed somebody and they left a 6-month-old baby in the car in Minnesota where it's freezing. This is just
Yeah,
insane.
that was a story of a family that were just kind of coming back into their neighborhood to get to their house, and a ICE officer fired a tear gas canister under their car. And so it wasn't like they were being anywhere they weren't supposed to be. They were in their neighborhood. And that baby basically almost died. That baby stopped breathing, and they had to get to emergency services because of, that what happened to that baby's lungs because of that tear gas. Things that I know have happened. A number of people have been arrested and taken to Whipple, which is the headquarters of ICE right now. There's the courts that are at ICE, but there's also a detention center in the basement of the building. It's somewhat makeshift. I don't think that they planned long term for this to be some kind of prison, but there have been people, observers, who were taken there, arrested, taken there, and the what they saw and what they heard was absolutely horrific. There were people in cells who were crying. There were children crying. People were begging to go to the bathroom. They were crammed into spaces that didn't allow for the number of people that were in those spaces. And one thing that was really striking to one of the couples that were arrested was the sort of banality of the conversation of the guards, just kind of having fun and everything while people are whimpering and crying, and just the sort of dehumanization that these people are willing to uh, do to the people that are getting arrested and detained.
I mean, as a historian who studied like fascist movements and genocide, what do you think is going on in America right now? Why do you think it's come to this point? At this point in time. I mean, yeah, on the one hand, it feels kind of like just weird luck, that this Trump was this major public figure. But, a lot of countries have had Trump like figures. I mean, I have one friend who writes a lot about Melik Kylan, who writes for the Wall Street Journal and Forbes. He covered like Georgia, and he's from Turkey and so on. So it's like this whole, this sort of charismatic strongman, leader seems to be something that people really are seeking right now. Yeah, and it seems like particularly conditions in America have reached a point where we're having this kind of civil collapse in a way.
Yeah, I mean, on the right, there is a coalition of people. You've got the Christian nationalists. You've got people who are sort of intellectual far right, uh, anti-democratic people. You've got billionaires. You've got a lot of people who are kind of on the ground level, who are middle class or working class, who are feeling really disaffected. It's like this perfect storm of people who are, on the one hand, again, a lot of these people are disaffected. They're feeling like the last 70 years of social change has left them in the dark, left them with less employment opportunities, an economy since the 1970s that, because of deindustrialization and the movement of industry abroad, has created economic conditions where people are not making what their parents made or making much less. And so there's just a fear that we are on a downslide to a lot of these folks. And so a voice like Donald Trump, which is promising a golden age and returning to a golden age, it sort of has elements of classic fascist movements through history, where somebody is promising some kind of greatness as long as people follow behind them. And also that element of scapegoating. Immigrants, we've had different phases of our history where nativism has been a thing where some group of people are blamed for all our problems, whether it's in the 1830s and it's the Irish, or the Chinese in the 1880s, or Jews in the early 20th century. We've always picked a group of people who we can blame our economic and social malaise for. And that's what's happening right now. And obviously, the target are people of color, and mostly immigrants right now, that these people are somehow taking everything from us. They're using our resources, they're frauds, all this kind of stuff. And people are just willing to, dehumanize these folks and treat them like they're less than. And it's sort of like every day something more happens. And you watch on social media people defending the fact that a a young woman who was basically going to try to slow ICE down gets shot in the face, and somehow that's acceptable. And the brutalization of people, it's like we're watching in real time the kinds of things that you would have seen in Nazi Germany at the outset of the Third Reich.
What kind of impact? I mean, I've been hearing some, optimistic reports that the really sustained resistance that people in Minneapolis are putting up against this, is having a big impact on ICE. Like their morale is low. They feel upset. They don't want to do their job anymore. I mean, do you think some of that is true? Do you feel that they're cracking a little bit under the pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear when you watch a large group of people able to stop them from doing their job. It's disheartening for them. Clearly, like they can't do what they think they're supposed to be doing. They realize they're outnumbered. They realize that they're loathed, that people do not like what they're doing, and people are really, really angry and upset. And it has all of the sort of symbolism of, you know, the redcoats, right? We're the patriots, they're the redcoats, and they are invading our community. And I think that they a lot of them have to realize they are not wanted here. And so there are people who are leaving ICE. They had a lot of trouble getting the set. Like there was 2,000 that came really quickly in December, and then an additional 3,000. And this 3,000 was really difficult. Apparently, according to leaked documents, people were realizing like this is going to be a lot more difficult than they thought it was going to be. They thought they could kind of just come in here and scare everybody, and that they would be able to do these abductions and get these numbers going. And they still are driven by this metric sort of uh, policy. Like they
Sure.
need to get so many bodies before
I mean,
they can consider this a victory. And
it's an
right
economic.
now, according to people on the ground, it looks like there's probably been about 1,700 real detentions and disappearances and arrests, whereas DHS, ICE has said there's at least 3,000 that have taken place.
Um, yeah, I mean, well, I had a question for you now. No, I've lost it for a second. Um, well, I guess the mayor was saying that he was asked why he didn't just arrest these ICE agents when they're doing illegal things. And he said, "Look, we only have 700 policemen, and there's 2,000 of these guys. They have much heavier weapons."
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that was kind of a bracing a thought in a way. And I guess now I just heard this morning that Tim Walz is considering calling the state National Guard to get involved. At that point, yeah, we are kind of approaching like Civil War territory, right? Because then you have like two different sovereign powers facing off against each other in the same territory.
Yeah, I mean, it
Um,
certainly looks like a lot of the scenarios that some writers have been talking about for the last, I don't know, 7 or so years. Stephen Marche's book, he does this sort of like, well, what might a civil war scenario look like? And that face off was definitely one of them between the federal and the state government. I think Walls is going
what
to
is that?
do
What is that
every
book, by the way? What was that book? The Stephen Marche. I
Stephen
don't know.
Marche, I can't remember the Coming Apart, I think is the name of the book.
Okay. Hmm.
Also, there's Barbara Walters' book on how civil wars, I think it's called How Civil Wars Start. That's exceptional. And I think if you want to look in her book at where we're at in terms of civil wars compared to, say, Serbia, Syria, or some of these other places in the 20th and 21st century, we've ticked off all of the major boxes. There's a huge profusion of guns in this country, and people on the right have most of the guns, but a lot of liberals, a lot of left wing folks are buying guns and long guns and getting trained and shooting and talking about forming militias. It's happening. So, I think for people in the Twin Cities, it feels like the municipal and the state governments are sort of impotent. And I know Walls is doing everything possible not to create a big conflagration because he knows what's at stake, and everything that you've mentioned, that this could be a flashpoint for some larger national thing. So he's being really calculated. I think the mayor of Minneapolis also feels, as you said, outgunned, overwhelmed. And so he is just basically kind of just saying, we don't want you here, and supporting peaceful non resistance. Most of the people I'm talking to in the Twin Cities believe we are still at a point where peaceful resistance is effective. It's doing what it should be doing, it's slowing things down, it's showing the rest of the country that we're not afraid. There's a lot more white folks this time around compared to the death of George Floyd that are willing to put their bodies in the way of this machine. And people realize the stakes. Like, we're talking about big change in this country, not just getting rid of ICE, getting rid of this president, but real racial reconciliation. That this, to me, speaks to the notion that white folks are finally starting to say, okay, we've been watching for 400 years, Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color have been struggling to make democracy real. It's our turn. It's our turn under these circumstances with a fascist government to pony up.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I also look at the thing. I mean, I know we just met, so you haven't like probably had a chance to look at my newsletter and my article. I'm a little. I feel like I almost don't even know what to say at this point. That's why I thought having just some conversations would be a good thing. But I mean, you know, it feels like, you know, on the meta level, there's stuff happening, you know, where, for instance, you know, the people behind Trump, you know, may actually want the country to break down and go bankrupt, because then, you know, all the public assets become distressed assets that oligarchs from around the world can come in and buy up. And yeah, they just look at it as like an opportunity to you know to turn the U.S. into spare parts, kind of like what they did with the USSR back in the 80s. So and then the other thing is, you know, artificial intelligence and the idea that that's going to lay off like a lot of the middle class, and you know the kind of intelligentsia are not needed anymore. You don't need like you know white collar people anymore. So you know I think their mindset is that you know most people are now kind of disposable, and yeah, that's a very scary circumstance. You know.
Yeah, I mean, this administration, these guys are totally looking out for themselves. They don't care about the country as a whole. Clearly, the notion of a functioning republic with different regions and different economies and different political belief systems doesn't matter. And so that kind of nihilism, the devaluing of human life, the sort of language that we're seeing, to me is just really an indication of a willingness to kind of let the whole American experiment go away. And that's why I sort of feel like a lot of my peoples and folks that I'm with, I feel like we're the ones that still want to try to keep that experiment going, and that it's still worth something. That being said, I think people are also kind of in the back of their minds starting to think about, well, what would a broken republic, a new sort of configuration of the United States look like? How would that physically look? How would we line ourselves up? I mean, we've sort of been doing it for some time in terms of where we move to different parts of the country, that sort of sorting that we've been doing. So it's certainly possible. I also think whether it's this year or 10 years from now, we're probably going to be dealing with this conflict between these parties for some time. And I think the violence is either going to be really large, or it's going to sort of just kind of continue on until something is figured out.
Yeah, I mean, you know, once again, looking at it from the classic kind of like overview, you know, perspective, you know, it feels like these poor schmucks in a way, like the people who are voting for Trump and supporting this movement, you know, they've just got the wrong targets in their sight. You know, they're like they're feeling oppressed by, you know, immigrants and you know, maybe the liberal elites, you know, who maybe do have some culpability when we look at the Democratic Party and sort of the structures there. But they're not looking at the, you know, oligarch class who are the ones who are like squeezing them like lemons for every last drop, you know. So I mean, and of course the whole media structure is organized to, you know, now support, you know, that view of the world where you sort of like don't you know, you make the target impossible to see for the people. But what do you think in those terms? Do you think there's any prospect for kind of this leading to some kind of like, purple awakening? Where red and blue kind of like break through these divisions and come together rather than being at each other's throats?
Yeah, I mean, I am a bit surprised that a lot of the gun rights libertarian people have been so silent in this period of absolute tyranny from the federal government. People who were talking about the jackbooted thugs. Um, and I'm hoping that a number of these people are going to wake up and say, oh my God, if I do believe in the Constitution, this is the threat that was talked about for so long. And by any measure, what I'm witnessing is absolutely unacceptable, unconstitutional, lawless. And I want to be on the right side of history. Yeah, I would hope there's going to be some of those people that wake up. I also am afraid that the information um, spheres that we live in are so vastly different. And if you're just constantly hearing that these protesters in Minneapolis are domestic terrorists, you know, and you don't really worry about the billionaire class, you're just going to kind of continue being chunked.
Yeah.
But I can't help but also think that there's going to be people who say, God damn it, these oligarchs are controlling everything. And it doesn't matter what party they're in, they have all the money. The inequality is so bad. That needs to shift. That needs to change.
Oof, I had another question. Oh gosh. Um, I wanted to ask you about the kind of I know you have to leave in a minute to take your kid out and stuff, but I wanted to ask you about the kind of on the ground activism and sort of like also I'm kind of curious 'cause it seems like, as you say, it's quite well organized quite quickly. What are some ideas or principles or what could also go, what could we use, when New York gets hit by this stuff or when other communities get hit by this,
I mean, I hope that other folks are kind of watching. I'm not going to name the app that's being used, but I think a lot of people know the encrypted app that's being used, and that it's pretty easy to kind of set up chats. Um, that being said, I think everybody every day are reminding each other this conversation that we're having is likely being surveilled. And that's a strange place to be, like thinking that everything that you're doing is somehow possibly under a microscope. Like even if it's not, that this government has been so successful at instilling this notion that they have the capability to read our minds practically. It's very Orwellian at this moment. Um, I would say one of the really striking things about the movement on the ground is this almost, I'm going to quote Marx, from each to his ability, to each of his need, that folks are trying to figure out, what can I do? I'm not comfortable going out in the street and harassing ICE or watching and observing ICE. I don't have that kind of risk capability, but I really would love to deliver food to families. Or I don't feel safe, driving food to someone's family, but I can give, I can help out. There's people who are doing canvassing, which means going to businesses with whistles and pamphlets which explain what their rights are to protect their workers, and to basically, if they don't want ICE to come into their business. So there's the canvassing going on, there's the car patrolling, there's the mutual aid. There are people who are doing immigrant legal advocacy. So they're going to the folks, they've done the training. My girlfriend is one of these people. She's a therapist, but she went and did this extensive legal training, which allows her to accompany people into immigration court to help them navigate that system. I mean, I could go on and on. It's just,
Mm.
there's thousands of people that are involved, not to mention all the direct action stuff, the protests. There are people who are making music every day in places to, bolster people's spirits. it just feels like a mobilization at multiple levels in a way I've never seen in my community. And so that notion of the creation of community, and that all of this stuff that we've set up, all of these connections and networks, I think can be used after this whole thing is over in a way that can bring us together in conversations about what kind of country do we want to live in.
Beautiful. Well, Adam, maybe I'll leave it there. That seemed like a very nice ending point. Unless there's something else you really want to share right now, but we can always connect another time. And I appreciate you giving me this time and sharing the information.
Thank you for great questions.
Yeah. Have a good one. Hope you and your daughter stay safe, and yeah, hope that the country, gets out of this collective psychosis and goes somewhere else.
Amen.
Yeah.
We'll see ya.
Ciao, ciao.